Welcome to our webinar today, Upskilling and Reskilling Mid-Career Workers. It's my pleasure to introduce Heather Tinsley-Fix from AARP, who will be presenting today. Heather, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Colin is going to be advancing the slides for me. I want to welcome you all to this conversation around upskilling mid-career workers. You may be wondering why AARP cares about this topic, and that is, of course, that we are living longer lives and our working lives are longer, and therefore working after the age of 50 is an increasingly common thing for all of us who are on the call, I'm sure, as well into the future. So it's really important to engage with you all, the employer community, on the value of older workers, but also really more broadly, the value of age diversity in general and the value of building age-inclusive organizations. So that's the sort of context in which we present this conversation to you. We're really excited to have Elaine Lamb from the Conference Board of Canada here to walk through the very interesting work that they've been doing on this topic. A little bit of housekeeping first. If you have a question, please enter it in the Q&A button for us rather than the chat, although if you do put it in the chat, of course, we'll happily answer it. But so put your questions in the Q&A button for our Q&A session towards the end. Please stay on mute, of course, until we open it up for questions. We're recording the session. Next slide, please. Right, so I'm going to kick it off with just a few slides to talk through some of the research we did last year with the employer community on in a nutshell, sort of skills-based hiring. This is a really interesting development in the talent acquisition space, and we're really interested in following it. I know many organizations care a lot about sort of how skills-based hiring can help them not only get the right people into the right jobs, but also address some of the inequities that have arisen over the years. So skills-based hiring as a tool for addressing equity challenges is something that we're very interested in. And we decided we would ask employers, how is this going? Like how is your orientation towards skills-based hiring? Do you value skills over education, the same as education? How do you, what do you think about credentials as proof of skills? So there, we can provide a link afterwards to the whole research deck, but I wanted to cover a couple of findings for you. The first is that the majority of employers that we surveyed do prioritize skills over education. You can see there that 76% of them, of the employers we surveyed, they look at skills first when they're doing screening for candidates versus education. They look at educational attainment second. So that's a huge chunk of people. The majority of employers are privileging skills and screening for those first. However, interestingly, the value that their organizations place on educational attainment has not decreased. It's not gone down. So while skills are rising in importance as a way of evaluating candidates and putting more emphasis on that, the value of education in evaluating candidates has not gone down. It's sort of remained the same. You can see 67% of the employers that we surveyed said that the value of educational attainment hasn't decreased in their organization. And so that's an interesting finding where we're clearly trying to make this culture shift away from educational attainment as the proxy for skills and more towards actual demonstrated skills. And yet education remains important. Next slide, Colin. As kind of a follow-up to that, we found in this research that 2/3 of the employers we surveyed did say that they felt that their organization needed to place a greater emphasis on skills and less on education in the future. 66% of them said this, which indicates to us that there is a strong desire for skills-based hiring and an emotion towards that, but that practically speaking, there's a little bit of a lag. Organizations are still trying to figure out exactly how to turn that into reality. Next slide, Colin. This is a research that this is a survey by McKinsey on strategies that employers are using to close the skills gaps that they face. Skills gaps are an increasing issue among employers, and there's a range of solutions that they employ to plug those gaps. So when McKinsey surveyed people this was sort of during the pandemic, sort of height of the pandemic, they found that of the 5 actions employers are taking to plug those gaps, namely building skills or reskilling, redeploying existing employees into new roles, hiring new people, releasing people, or contracting, that the action that had driven up the most during the pandemic was reskilling. In other words, that activity as a way of plugging the skills gap has really increased dramatically during the pandemic, and likely will continue to be a key strategy for employers that are looking for employees with the skills they need. Interestingly, too, to me, redeploying, so pivoting, taking existing employees and presumably getting them new skills and redeploying them into new roles is the second largest activity that employers are using, a little bit more than just a little bit higher than hiring. And so this definitely indicates that reskilling is part of the landscape now. It's part of what organizations know that they have to do. And I'm very interested to hear, Elaine, your thoughts on this as we get to your slides in a bit, because I know that career transitions are something that you've been studying closely for the last number of years. And so that's an interesting tactic to me. How do you take your existing employees who have all of this institutional knowledge, who have all of these soft skills, and instead of just releasing them and trying to hire new people, which is a costly and time-consuming business, what about just giving them the reskilling they need to move them into roles that that you as an organization are facing crunches in? Next slide, Colin. Last thing I wanted to pull out of our research for you in terms of findings is that we asked employers what soft skills they valued the most, and asked them if they saw older workers as having an advantage or having the same level of skill as their younger counterparts. And these are skills like, you can see here, work ethic and professionalism, teamwork or collaboration, adaptability to change, so sort of having a learning mindset, being resilient, problem solving skills, customer service skills. These are really important skills that are difficult to automate or not at risk currently of automation, because there's these uniquely human skills that we need for making sense of things, for developing relationships, for making judgment calls. These types of skills are the ones that tend to take time to develop. And so it was not surprising to us. In fact, it was quite gratifying to hear that employers agree with us. They see older workers as generally in the realm of soft skills as having the advantage of or performing the same as their younger counterparts. So that's something to think about in regard to this whole topic, is why would you want to reskill your mid-career workers, your late career workers? And the reason is, one of the strongest reasons is that they do possess this wealth of soft skills, which are the ones that tend to not be at risk of automation, but also are the ones that are adaptable and transferable. So you can provide, they do provide that, that continuity across different job roles within your organization. And so I think this is just an important thing to keep in mind when you're thinking about how are you going to plug your skills gap, where are you going to find people with the skills you need? Well, the solution might be hiding in plain sight, which is the workers that you already have. How can you give them just a little bit of retooling, find those adjacent skills to this wealth of soft skills they have, and help them pivot into new roles? So on that topic, now I am going to turn the presentation over to Elaine Lamb. Colin, next slide, please. Dr. Elaine Lamb is the Chief of Partnerships and Education Research at the Conference Board of Canada. She's been studying education and skills for the last 20 years. So I'm very excited to hear to hand this over to her and then have a conversation with her afterward. Elaine, take it away.
Thanks so much, Heather. Really appreciated the context you provided, and welcome everybody. I'm providing a perspective on some of the work we've done at the Conference Board of Canada. So this is in a Canadian context, and I was just having a pre-chat with Heather talking about how there is potentially a different policy landscape that we look at. We take the whole perspective of employment and labor market retention at a systems level in thinking about the role the government can play, and as well as our publicly funded institutions, including colleges and universities. So the context is probably a little bit different, but the issues are very much the same. So just as a way of introduction, the Conference Board of Canada is an independent applied research organization. We deliver insights on Canada's toughest problems, and we do work in economics, education skills, health, Indigenous governance issues, and as well immigration, innovation, sustainability. So it's a long list. We do research on all sorts of different areas. One of our most meaningful partnerships is with the Future Skills Center. It's a pan-Canadian consortium where we look at where we can better support Canadians in preparing for the future of work. A lot of our work has been focused on the impact of automation, as we know that that will have a direct touch point with every position in our country. And as well, we look at how we can prepare Canadians in the best ways for adults to learn skills. So much of what Heather had brought up in terms of the context resonates with us. We really do believe that there is an opportunity for us to really take into consideration skills, the ways that workers can acquire skills, and to be able to have that zest for lifelong learning. Next slide, please. So just to give you an overview of some of the things we look at in terms of thinking about how to best prepare Canadians for the future work. So a number of the skills that Heather outlined are the ones that we look at in terms of what we call social and emotional skills. So problem solving skills, communication, negotiation, social orientation, service orientation. A lot of these skills we really believe are the skills of the future. They're human skills, and they're necessary for us to think about how we can continue to develop these skills in order to meet labor market needs. We also know social emotional skills tend to be the ticket for promotion and retention. And we know this is really important for mid-career workers who often are looking to stay in the labor market until they're ready. We also look at other ways that adults learn skills. So work integrated learning, some of that's through college programs, where you have the opportunity to get a little more hands-on, as well as experiential learning, where you've got the opportunity to really get into more applied research skills and to be able to think about shorter placements that are a little bit more bite-sized beyond just traditional internships and co-ops. A lot of our work is really focused on job transitions, and we're fascinated by this mostly because we think this really will help a lot of mid-career workers to be able to move from jobs to jobs, but also be able to think about that based on skill similarity. So we've developed a tool, which I'll talk about a little bit more further on, called OpportuneNext. You can find that available at opportunext.ca. What's really interesting about OpportuneNext is it maps out possible career transitions that will help workers be able to think about all the types of jobs that are very adjacent to theirs, and it gives salary information as well, a clear sense of where those jobs are. Just to quickly run through the list, we're also looking at neurodiversity in the workplace. This is very important to us. So thinking about ADHD, ASD, learning disabilities, and how to keep those types of workers in the labor market to ensure that they are able to really reach their potential, and that we're able to work with employers to help figure out what are the best ways to keep them there. We're looking at digital skills, as we know these are sought after, and that every employer that we've been talking to has a different definition of what those skills are. And so getting a clear sense of digital skills, a framework, so we can think about this nationally is important. In Canada, we have a big mandate to think about truth and reconciliation for Indigenous peoples. They tend to be overrepresented in unemployment rates and in all other indicators where we feel are very socially significant. So thinking about how to support Indigenous workers in being able to thrive in labor market is very important to us. And for one example of where we see that is in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. The last one really is about forecasting. So we do a lot of that in terms of thinking about how many engineers we need by 2030, how many cooks we need by 2040, what are the needs of tomorrow, and how do we get closer on that in sense of getting a clear idea of what are the jobs most impacted by technology, and what are the jobs that we know are going to be the biggest growth industries. And so a lot of our work really focuses on how do we get better labor market information. Next slide, please. So in terms of mid-career workers, this is a huge focus of our work because we know that we are seeing accelerated change, and that we often get that perception that mid-career workers, we're not sure where they fit in. Certainly, we know that it can be difficult to keep up with the pace of change for all workers, but particularly for those in mid-career because of the fact that there is ageism in the workplace. We know that career transitions can be hard for everyone, but especially for thinking about displacement and when that occurs. We know that displacement in mid-career does have some impact on things like early retirement, and that there is quite a bit of planning that actually needs to go to make that have the least impact on workers. And so we've seen a number of programs out there, usually by bigger employers, to help think about what that offboarding could look like and how they can actually help create programs that would reskill and upskill. And a number of those programs came out during the pandemic, and we're always interested to figure out what those leading practices are. Next slide, please. So why do we care? A big piece of this is in Canada, and again, that political context always helps. And a worker has to be out of a job before they can access help. So it's a different way of thinking about how we can reform and create better opportunities for career transitions and job transitions, beyond just having people displaced and having them accessing social benefits and going through that moral frustration of trying to find a new job. We want to be able to shift the conversation and develop a system and a mindset where there's a lot more prep early on, not only for workers to chart their own future, but also for employers to understand what that looks like at scale. So a classic example is during the pandemic, many of those in the hospitality and tourism industry, particularly airlines, were laid off or furloughed. One option that we saw, which was a neat program, was how to retrain airline pilots to be able to work as risk managers for portfolios, because of the decision-making that it requires is very similar to the types of decision you make when you're midair. So being able to think about reskilling and upskilling in a way that's a lot broader, industry focused is really what we see as that future forward model. It's about systems change and be able to set workers up for success to ensure that they have a clear sense of what automation looks like and what digital disruption will have on their jobs. Next slide, please. So with that, we created OpportunityNext, and a tool that we launched last year, which focuses on how to prepare for changes through similar skills. OpportunityNext.ca is a tool that's free. It's available for anybody. It is focused on the context of Canada, so I hope you're able to at least find some interesting things there about job transitions. We designed it with a career counselor and the sector leader in mind. And so actually one of our first projects was with the hospitality and tourism industry, working with the biggest employers in the country to think about how we can better support those displaced by having restaurants and hotels and travel essentially to a halt 2 years ago. So one of the first projects we did was actually mapped out all the different types of jobs that are in the hospitality and tourism industry. We looked at those that were at really high risk of automation, like hotel front desk clerks, because now you can sign in using your phone. And we looked at what other jobs that they could transition to and what those types of retraining programs could look like. This is one sector specific example. We're doing another big project right now, looking at where people with disabilities are working in Canada and what are the types of jobs they're working at. And if they are high risk of being automated, what are the jobs that those people with disabilities could then do? It's an interesting project because we want to be able to support more people with disabilities to work. We don't want them to leave the labor market. We want them to find their path through that. So OpportunityNext, feel free to check it out, OpportunityNext.ca, again, free of charge. It is a tool that we developed to really look at sector transitions. You know, how do we better support airline pilots, hotel front desk clerks, cooks, those who are mechanics that could be retrained to work on smart vehicles, and what does that look like? Next slide, please. So just a couple of tidbits about it. Again, we created it to help Canadians make better career decisions. And ultimately, we wanted to answer research questions with data. So for example, we know that career transitions are based on skill similarities, and we know that people will have a particular tolerance for how much they're willing to take a salary cut. So that became one of our factors, not just simply, you know, you're a baker, now you can become a welder, but thinking as well, what's the pay differential and how much can people tolerate? We also know that geography is a major factor, that most people are not willing to drive more than 30 kilometers each way to their job because it makes an impact on their lifestyle. And we wanted to get better at understanding what that actually means. And so that's helped us as well. We're now looking at desirability, which we think is a really interesting factor. So what makes a job transition desirable? Is it that it's got the same elements of office versus outdoors? Is there an aspect of gender stereotype that we need to look at a little more closely? So Opportunex has helped us answer some questions to understand what propels a transition and what creates barriers that we're not necessarily aware of. We are so interested in desirability right now that we're doing a project specifically looking at the insurance industry. In Canada, insurance is one of those industries that's high growth. We seem to like insurance quite a bit. And so there's a lot of potential for great jobs in insurance. But we know that for some people, it just may not be a desirable transition. So we want to know why. We want to understand a little bit more about what it is about being in the insurance industry that creates some barriers that we're just simply not aware of. Is it that it's a desk job, and many of the jobs that are similar to it aren't desk jobs? Is it to do with the stigma potentially that we're not aware of, and we want to better understand what that is? Are we looking at personality types, those who are more highly regulated than others? So desirability for us is the next frontier. Next slide, please. So I've got my colleague's name up there, Heather McIntosh, so feel free to reach out to her for any questions or comments. I as well can be reached at elam@theconferenceport.ca. I will type that into the chat, and I would welcome any opportunity to chat further. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen to some of the work we're doing.
Thank you so much, Elaine. That was really fascinating. I know that we may have some questions from the audience, but I wanted to kick it off first by asking you a little bit more about how Opportunext works. Is it taking, does it use job descriptions or skill families or competency models to figure out how an existing person's set of skills may have a lot of overlap with another profession and they just need to acquire a couple more? What's the sort of engine underneath Opportunext?
So great question, because we are always looking at the unit of skills. That's very, very important to us. So what we did is we took a couple of different databases. There's something called the ONET database, which is used by the OECD. And it actually provides a very clear sense of what are the skill profiles for all the various different national occupation codes. So we use NOC codes. So every job has a NOC code in Canada, for example, and every job can be matched to ONET data, which gives a clear sense of, is this a skill like active listening? Is how much of that is needed for this particular job? How much is writing needed, and what level of that? So every job has a number of different skills. And what we did with Opportunext is we match them. So if you're a welder, for example, there might be 7 or 8 different types of jobs that have a very similar skill set, and we rank them. So it starts all the way from 99% match, all the way to some of the lowest matching ones. We obviously want to take the highest matching ones. And so when you type in something like welder into Opportunext, you'll get a list of side-by-side comparisons of the different jobs you can transition to. But more importantly, you'll actually get side-by-side comparisons of salary information and how many jobs we think that there are going to be. So Opportunext is powered by one of our projection tools. It's called MOST. And what it is, it's a projection tool that's beyond just the usual, you need 100,000 dentists to sustain a population of 100 million people. It actually looks at, are dentists going to be automated? And if they are, what are the projections and how long will that take to automate them? So it'll give you a clear sense of where the jobs are and what the impact of automation on those jobs are.
That's so interesting. I mean, I know that, automation has long been kind of this boogeyman topic, like, where all of our jobs are going to be taken from us. And we know now that that's less accurate. It's more a case that many of our job tasks will be automated. So it's just a question of sort of what percentage of your job could be taken over by automation. However, there are some jobs that will be completely eliminated. You mentioned hotel front clerk, front desk clerks checking you in. I've definitely checked in with an app recently. So, and I think that pace of automation has accelerated during COVID for obvious reasons. So what do you find workers how are they responding to this? This is not a situation that workers have had to find themselves in before, where they're having to plot their own career paths. They're having to figure out what comes next. They're having to stay abreast. And I'm sure that workers en masse are not doing this, because this is a huge culture shift. What do you find through the work that you do in terms of the kind of mindset it takes now to compete, particularly as a mid-career worker who has maybe sort of gotten used to doing things, or at least gotten used to an expectation of employment?
That's very much part of why this motivated us to create Opportunity X. Was we wanted to be able to involve sector councils and to be able to speak to a higher audience beyond just the workers, because a lot of this is navigating themselves, right? In terms of having to think about what are the skills they need if they decide to go from becoming a hotel front desk clerk to what we know they probably do very well, which is a limo driver, which we don't see happening as being eliminated anytime soon. We haven't quite gotten to the era of self-driving cars. People still will need to be able to get from one place to another. And we know that limo drivers tend to have a more robust outlook than those in the gig economy, like Uber drivers. So that was one transition, for example, that we found, where same element of service, same sense of ensuring that there is a clear communication skill. And so this really was about, how do we communicate to a major player in the labor market, which is a sector council, and how do we help those who may be part of a hotel association or a tourism association? How do we help them plan at scale to say, look, in the next 10 years, we're going to lose 50,000 hotel front desk clerks. Here's what we know about their most likely job transition. And having talked to them, we know that they are interested in on-the-job training. They can't afford retraining that's any more than 6 months. And here are some options for us to think about this writ large. Because we live in Canada and because there's a government context in terms of employment, there tends to be that clear sense of, is there a cohesive way for us to do this, so that if we know that there's going to be a mass exodus because of displacement, how do we get better at providing those types of supports? And so working with the sector council has been important, but beyond that, working with major employers has been really great too. Just being able to have that awareness that this is coming, that you're going to have a huge amount of change in the way you do business. So how do we equip better in terms of thinking about what are the types of programs you can actually implement now to prepare people for the jobs that you're going to need in 5 or 10 years that are going to be more based on things like e-commerce, collaboration tools, and to be able to set your business up for success. So, short answer is, what we know is more important right now than anything else. The information we have in front of us will really help us prepare for that big shift.
And when you do talk with employers, what kinds of programs do you see them adopting? I mean, I realize that the context is slightly different in Canada, but in terms of how companies are responding to the need to reskill their employees, do you hear that they have challenges and barriers, or that they are, shifting towards baking this into the DNA of their organization? We are, becoming a learning organization. What are the things that you're hearing?
So in terms of so a lot of our work now is that outreach and try to understand how do we get closer to what's actually happening on the ground. So one of the things that we've learned is social emotional skills are the cornerstone of all job transitions in terms of they're highly valued, they're sought after in the labor market. We're always hearing about soft skills. We call them human skills or just social emotional skills. And so being able to create opportunities for workers to learn them, to be more accustomed to them, to feel comfortable is really important for us to be able to think about the jobs of tomorrow. And so we're doing that work now and trying to understand, what are the differences between worker perceptions and employer perceptions. We've recently completed one of the largest studies we've ever done, 9,000 respondents, just trying to understand the differences in social emotional skills. And there are some differences in terms of how employers view social emotional skills, which ones they think are most needed and what they perceive of them versus workers. And so trying to answer that piece of the puzzle is really important, because we know skills mean different things to different people. We've done a lot of work on how to better assess skills and the different types of tools that can be used to assess skills. So being able to see those rolled out would be something that would be very important to us.
Yeah, one of the things that sparks my curiosity too about assessing skills is, we have credentials for project management and for hard technical skills and for specific types of, healthcare certifications. There's all kinds of professional certifications and credentials that you can get to add to your resume, which, make you more desirable as a candidate. However, these human skills that we've been talking about, which are so important and that are, as you mentioned, factor heavily in getting promoted, factor heavily in being retained, factor heavily in being able to transition. We don't seem to we really don't have, credentials or ways of assessing those that I'm aware of. How do you said you're working on ways to get better at assessing those types of skills. What can you give me some examples of those? Because that's really, I feel like that's such a big portion of the competitiveness of older workers is those human skills.
So we have done quite a bit of work on looking at all the tools that are available for assessing social emotional skills, active listening, service orientation, and speaking, negotiation, all the rest of it. And we did find a number of different tools, and I'll type the link into the chat just so folks can see it a little bit more clearly laid out. We found 3 different types of categories of these types of tools. There was the first one, which is always helpful. It's a free version. And it provides workers and anybody really with the assessment of where their strengths lie. We like this model because it's free and it's openly available, and it provides some assessment to you as an individual interested in where your strengths are. That's the first set of tools. The second set are tools that employers use and they deploy for their staff in terms of hiring. And there's all sorts of skills you can choose. You can choose Excel skills or writing. What these types of tools do, though, is they also have particular cuts that are just focused on social emotional skills. And they're quiz-like questions, fairly easy to answer, low barrier to access. One of the things we wanted employers to consider was that there's no feedback loop back to the actual candidate, right? There's no kind of offboarding to say, we didn't hire you because we seem to think that your active listening skills, you didn't come out as well as we would have liked. There's no offboarding process. It's really for the employer, which is great for hiring potentially. We haven't seen any big study that shows these tools are extremely effective, that the pass rates of the assessment tools reflect the actual performance rate 6 months down the road. We haven't seen any research on that, but we do think that they are used and they have a role in screening. The third set of tools is really a more of a didactic supporting type mechanism. They provide the assessment. You can also share that assessment with others like mentors or superiors that would then rate that skill and give you a clear sense of, beyond kind of you thinking that you're a really great listener, somebody else telling you, actually, maybe you're not. So what we really liked about this set was that it provided some offboarding. Like there was actually here's your results, here's what it means. Here's a 10-minute video on active listening, just so you've got a clear sense of what people seem to look for. Or if you really want to get better negotiation, here's a longer module that you can take on that. So a really clear sense of support and care to the learner. And the reason we like this is because we believe that social emotional skills are not a one and done, right? You're not born with these skills. There is an opportunity to actually get better at them. We can all get better at them. And that we know that workers really prefer that kind of learning. It's on demand, it's available to them anytime. It doesn't require, years and years of having to take another course or another degree or to go back to school. And anyway, so I'll put the research into the chat because it is definitely interesting what we found.
Great. Thank you so much. I would like to invite anyone to ask a question in the Q&A section or to come off mute and ask your question. Feel free to raise your hand. If you're not wanting to ask a question, please remember to keep yourself on mute so that we can hear the what Elaine's talking about. Elaine, so I kind of want to ask about mindsets now. One of the things that you mentioned is that you have a mandate to address historical issues of inequity with Indigenous populations, and inequity is sort of, it's not confined to just, that group. So there's plenty of other groups that have been shut out of opportunity, and we're trying to open those doors of opportunity through the skills-based hiring. But there's also the question of mindsets. How do you take a group and empower them with the mindsets they need to succeed? So there's the acquisition of a skill, but then there's also the acquisition of a mindset. How do we switch mindsets?
This is a terrific question, and part of what's motivating us to understand more about digital skills. So we heard a lot about this during the pandemic in terms of willingness for workers to try new collaboration tools. In a lot of ways, we were forced to, right? Like it's, Zoom has been around for quite some time, as you well know, and it's the idea that now everything's going to be done with these new collaboration tools. So mindset is really, really important. We know that it's one of the biggest motivating factors for someone to acquire more digital skills is simply the willingness to learn a new technology, to be able to put together a playlist, right? The same skill that you had when you first got your first Walkman or Discman, to the first time you got an MP3 player, to figuring out how to get it all downloaded an Napster. I'm really dating myself here, but it's this idea that it's the same skill, right? Like it's not simply just you learned how to copy over tapes from the radio, and that was a skill that you needed when you were, in your younger years, radio was the only option of how you can get free music, to, now we can actually help curate Spotify lists and help older generations find a song that they haven't heard of in a long time. It's high quality audio. So it's the same skill. And so that mindset shift is what we're studying now with our digital skills project. We're looking at what are the skills that employers really need when they talk about digital skills. Is it just simply turning on a laptop and learning to use a phone camera? Or is it more than that? Is it actually the desire to learn and the desire to try something new? So coding has always been a big skill out there. It's rumored to be the next blue collar job in Canada in terms of thinking about like, what are the skills we need to build on top of coding? So that's one example of a digital skill that we know there's a lot of talk about, but we want to understand what is it about coding that's important.
Yeah, that's really interesting. We do have a question in the chat, but I want to come back to, I have another follow-up question. So hold on, I thought we had a question in the chat. No, I guess not. Okay. So I want to get back to that about, mindset and digital, like sort of digital skills being woven into every job. So there is a lot of talk about these human skills, and yet we have to take those human skills and apply them to jobs that largely involve interacting with technology. So what do companies, how do companies address basic digital literacy that you're seeing? How do they take that training on themselves? Or, in other words, take the onus on themselves to train their employees in that? Do they give them, training dollars, like a reimbursement plan to go out and get those skills that they need? What are you hearing about sort of basic digital literacy in employment?
We are hoping to find that out and to better understand what are the different types of ways in which employers can provide that type of support. I will say this about digital skills, and we talk a lot about digital skills. We talk about digital infrastructure because a lot of it goes hand in hand. In the inequities piece, we are seeing a lot of discussion about that in Canada in terms of being able to think about issues that the pandemic brought up, in terms of some households just simply not having high quality internet. So the piece of digital skills always also been about digital infrastructure. What's the groundwork we need to lay in order to ensure that every community across Canada has access to good internet. And so the whole desire to be able to have more of these types of digital skill literacy programs, which I think is very, very important, goes with that conversation of, well, first we need good internet and running water. So we're not quite there yet in understanding what are the mechanisms for uncovering the best ways that digital skills can be taught. What we do know is that employers always have a stronger preference for on-the-job learning. And so anything that can be embedded as part of the workday is important. Our theory behind this is it has to do with investment of time. People see time and money as exactly the same thing. Sometimes they even put a bigger premium on time. And so being able to do that on the job is very important. We also know that on-the-job training is incredibly useful because it gives you that skill in context. Yes. And that's something we heard a lot about. we spent 2 years talking to Canadians across the country, 1,300 of them, something called our virtual regional sounding tour. And one of the things we heard was that it's not just simply about learning a skill, it's learning about a skill in context. And so work-based learning is very important to that puzzle.
Right. Well, our research shows that older workers and so mid-career workers are definitely have the mindset of wanting to reskill, that they're willing to do so, but some of the barriers like that you've been talking about, or time and just bandwidth in their existing job. So we definitely hear that. That's the same that we're hearing here. But I mention it because there tends to be this sort of pervading notion that older workers are set in their ways, that they don't want to learn new things. And our research puts paid to that myth. 76% of workers say they're willing to learn a new skill. That goes up to 94% if the question is asked, would you gain a new skill if supported by your employer? So employer support is really key in attaining the upskilling opportunities. The other thing I wanted to mention too is that it's a mind shift for the employees, but also for employers. We have to start building organizations that are learning organizations, where learning is part of our not only our cultural DNA, and the support is there for that, but also it's something that we're evaluated on. So it's part of our performance objectives, is actual like reskilling and gaining new skills. It has to be woven into the fabric of our jobs, so that learning and work are kind of braided together. I think that's one of the key ways that this big skill revolution or skill shift, is, the great reskilling, if you will, is going to happen. So again, Elaine, thank you so much for being here and for providing all of this great information, and thanks for all the links in the chat. I just want to encourage everyone to reach out to contact me, contact Heather McIntosh, Elaine's colleague, or Elaine herself if you want to learn more about OpportuNext, which is something that I am really interested in digging into. And of course, don't hesitate to look for our resources for employers at aarp.org/employers. Just want to say again, thank you for joining. Join the rest of your day. Take care, everyone. Stay safe. Bye.